Boudica set Roman Britain on fire, then vanished so completely that even her grave refuses to exist. Britannia was a hard land under a new kind of rule, where straight Roman roads cut through old tracks and sacred groves, and where soldiers and surveyors measured fields as if they were counting coins. Rome called it peace, but the people who lived there tasted it as pressure, taxes, seizures, and the slow feeling of being pushed out of their own world. Boudica rose from that world, a queen of the Iceni, a woman known not for soft words but for presence, the kind that could still a room without lifting a hand. She was not a distant symbol behind a veil. She was a living ruler in a place where loyalty was personal, and where a leader's strength was felt up close. Her husband ruled as a client king, trying to survive by bending without breaking, offering Rome enough obedience to keep the legions away. When he died, he left a will meant to protect his household, his daughters, and his people, a fragile bridge between two worlds that did not truly trust each other. Rome treated that will like a door left unlocked. Officials arrived as owners, not guests, and what had been a kingdom became an inventory. Men walked into halls where they had once been received with respect, and now they opened chests, seized property, and spoke of law while taking everything that gave law meaning. Then came the punishment that echoes through every telling, even when the details cannot be held in the mouth for long. Boudica was seized and beaten in public, and her daughters were violated, not as a side effect of chaos but as a message carved into flesh. It was Rome saying, "Your crown means nothing here. Your family means nothing here. Your future belongs to us." After that, something inside the province broke cleanly, like a bone. Agreements that had lasted years turned to ash in a single night, and the anger that had been held down by fear rose fast and hot. In smoky gatherings and tense conversations, people began to speak not of compromise but of refusal. Boudica became the shape that anger could follow. Her name moved from mouth to mouth, carried across fields and forest paths, gathering allies who did not want Rome's order anymore. Wagons rolled behind the fighters, families came too, and that detail matters, because it meant they were not planning to raid and retreat, they were planning to change the world or die trying. The Roman governor, Suetonius Paulinus, was away fighting on the edges of the island, chasing victory far from the places that were about to explode. While he marched elsewhere, the province's center stood exposed, guarded by confidence more than soldiers. Rome did not believe the ground under it could rise. The first target was Camulodunum, a Roman colony planted like a flag in native soil, filled with veterans and Roman pride. It held a great temple that shouted permanence, a stone promise that Rome intended to stay forever. To the rebels, the city was not just a settlement, it was an insult that could burn. The defenses were thin, the pleas for help were late, and when the uprising hit, it hit like fire thrown into dry thatch. The streets became smoke, the buildings became traps, and those who hid in the temple found it was only stone, not salvation. The flames did not negotiate, and mercy did not arrive. News raced faster than marching feet. Some said the dead were counted in the tens of thousands, and whether the number was true or swollen by fear, the effect was the same. Roman authority suddenly felt like a mask that could be torn off, and that realization is the kind that makes men either flee or become ruthless. When Suetonius returned and faced Londinium, he made a choice that still tastes bitter. He looked at the young town, busy with trade and promise, and decided he could not hold it. He chose to save his army, and in doing so he abandoned a city that believed Rome would protect it. The people left behind understood too late what it meant to depend on an empire. They fled with whatever they could carry, and those who could not flee waited for a rescue that never came. Then the rebels arrived, and Londinium became a burning lesson. Its markets and streets turned into choking darkness. The fire moved next to Verulamium, and by then the pattern was clear. This was not a scattered riot, it was a sweeping destruction, aimed at the places where Roman life had taken root. Every burning roof sent the same message: Rome can bleed here, Rome can lose here. Boudica's name shifted depending on who spoke it. To her people, she was a leader who refused humiliation, and to Rome, she was a nightmare wearing a crown. In that split, the story begins to blur, because fear changes the way men describe what they see, and victory changes the way men pretend they always knew what would happen. But fire is not enough to win against discipline forever. Rage can surge, but it can also scatter, and wagons and families make an army heavy. Rome had something colder than anger. It had training, patience, and the ability to turn terrain into a weapon. The final confrontation gathered in a narrow place chosen with intent, a stretch of ground that limited movement and punished chaos. The rebels arrived with their wagons forming a ring, a promise that no one would run, and a terrible mistake if the battle turned. Families watched, possessions waited, and the air held the weight of a decision that could not be taken back. Stories say Boudica spoke before the clash, calling on gods, pointing to what Rome had done, promising that life under the empire would be a kind of death. But the speeches never match exactly, and that mismatch matters, because it suggests that even her last words have been fought over, shaped into whatever each side needed them to be. The battle came like a collision of worlds. The rebels surged forward in a mass of bodies and momentum, and the Romans did not break. Javelins fell, shields held, and the narrow ground turned the charge into a crush where the front ranks could not retreat even if they wanted to. Step by step the Roman line moved, not like a flood but like a door closing. The rebels tried to pull back, and the wagons behind them stopped the withdrawal. What had been meant as courage became a wall, and in that trap the rebellion began to die, squeezed between Roman discipline and its own crowded rear. Afterward, the accounts speak of slaughter, of bodies stacked so thickly that the ground itself seemed changed. Whether the numbers are exact or exaggerated, the shape of the defeat is not in doubt. The uprising that had burned cities was suddenly broken, and the smoke left behind felt like a funeral for a dream. And then the story does something strange. The rebellion ends in blood and noise, but its leader does not end in view. Boudica does not appear in chains. She is not dragged into a public square. She is not displayed as proof that Rome has won. Instead, Boudica disappears into competing endings that never settle. One version says she took poison, choosing her own death rather than giving Rome the satisfaction of capturing her. It is an ending that feels sharp and controlled, and that may be why it survives so easily. Another version says she died of illness after the battle, as if the rebellion burned through her and left her body empty of strength. That ending is quieter, and quiet endings often feel less true to people who want history to sound like thunder. But quiet is sometimes where truth hides. Then there is the possibility that refuses to die, the thought that she escaped. Not to raise another army, not to return with more fire, but simply to vanish into the landscape that raised her, into marsh, forest, and winter fog. A queen without a court, a name without a body, a leader who cannot be claimed. The written voices do not close the gap, they widen it. Tacitus and Cassius Dio leave different shapes of her last moments, and between those shapes is a space large enough to swallow certainty. A woman who shook Rome becomes a question mark, and the empire that loved records suddenly leaves a missing page. The mystery sharpens when the ground itself stays silent. If Boudica died among her people, where is her grave? Where is the mound? Where is the marked place that whispers, "She lies here"? A leader who ignited a province should have left a scar in the earth, yet there is no agreed burial, no fixed shrine, no place that can be pointed to without doubt. Some say her followers hid her body so Rome could not defile it, and that fear makes sense. Rome understood symbols, and it knew how to break them, to take a body and turn it into a warning. If they could not stop her rebellion in life, they could still try to crush her in death. So perhaps she was laid in secret ground, in a grove known only to a few, or in a marsh that swallowed footsteps, or beneath a place that could never be dug without destroying what was sacred. Perhaps no marker was allowed, because any marker could lead Rome to her. A hidden grave would be the final act of resistance. But secrets do not last forever without effort, and yet this one did. It lasted so long that even the people who swore to protect it vanished into time. The silence feels deliberate, as if an entire community agreed to forget the location rather than risk it being discovered. There is another colder thought that crawls in when the silence grows too complete. What if Rome did find her after the battle, not publicly but quietly, and chose to keep the ending small on purpose? A public execution might have made her a martyr, a triumph might have turned her into a banner, but a missing queen could be pushed into uncertainty until even her enemies could argue about what happened. That would fit Rome's hunger for control, because control is not only about killing, it is about shaping what survives. If Boudica's end became unclear, her story could fracture, and fractured stories lose power. Yet the fracture here does not weaken the legend, it sharpens it, because an unfinished ending refuses to stop haunting the land. So the province remains full of unanswered spaces. Somewhere, a last cup might have been lifted, a last breath might have been taken, a last order might have been whispered to those who stayed loyal to the very end. But none of it can be held with certainty, and the lack of certainty feels like a door left open in the dark. If Rome built roads to make everything reachable, why is the end of the woman who burned its cities still unreachable? If she died, why does the earth refuse to name the place? If she lived, how did she disappear so completely that an empire could not drag her back into the light? Where did Boudica go when the fires died down? And why did history let her leave without leaving a grave behind?